suppose it's strange to admit this now. After all the years I've kept it buried like a secret too heavy to lift. Part of me still flinches from the truth, but here I am, sitting in the dim glow of the apartment I've made my own. And all I can think about is James. James, the man who stepped into my life like a quiet savior, only to become the storm I never saw coming. The man who wasn't just my adopted father, but the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about myself. I never meant for any of this to happen. I used to be a girl adrift. No roots, no real family to speak of. My mother died when I was 9, leaving me to bounce through foster homes until I landed with James and his wife, Lila, at 16. They adopted me, gave me a name and a place to belong. It wasn't perfect. Lila was distant, more focused on her art than on me. But James was different. He was steady, kind, with a warmth that made me feel seen. We lived a simple life in their modest house on the edge of town. I finished high school, took odd jobs, and they supported me in their understated way. There were bumps, sure. Lila's coldness, the occasional arguments. But I loved them, or at least I thought I did, in the way a stray loves the hand that feeds it. It started at one of those dinners, the kind James insisted on every Sunday to keep us connected. The house smelled of roasted chicken and thyme, the table set with mismatched plates. Lila was there, sipping her wine, her eyes half-lidded with disinterest, while James carved the bird, his sleeves rolled up, his laughter filling the gaps her silence left. I was 22 then, home from a failed stint at college, helping out as always, setting the table, clearing dishes, playing the dutiful daughter. It was routine, comforting, until it wasn't. That night, something shifted. James had invited a few neighbors over, nothing grand, just a casual gathering. The living room buzzed with chatter, the clink of glasses, the hum of an old jazz record spinning in the corner. I moved through it all, refilling drinks, nodding at stories I'd heard before. James was in his element, his sandy hair catching the light, his broad smile softening the lines etched into his 48-year-old face. He'd always been handsome in a rugged, unassuming way, but that night I noticed it differently. It wasn't the wine or the way I'd spent the evening orbiting him. It was him. He was by the window when I saw it, talking to old Mr. Carter about some woodworking project. His hands moved as he spoke, strong and sure, and his hazel eyes flickered with a quiet fire. I'd known him 6 years, called him Dad without hesitation, but that night he wasn't just James, my adopted father. He was a man, vital, alive, magnetic in a way that made my stomach twist. His gaze caught mine across the room, lingering a beat too long, and I felt a jolt, sharp and unbidden, that I couldn't explain away. The evening wore on, but as the guests trickled out and Lila retreated to her studio, I found myself alone in the kitchen, scrubbing pans under the fluorescent light. That's when he came in, his footsteps soft on the linoleum. "You don't have to do all that, Ellie," he said, his voice low and warm, the same tone he'd used 1,000 times to comfort me. "Lila's probably lost in her paints by now. Let me help." I turned, startled, water dripping from my hands. "It's fine," I said, forcing a smile. "I've got it." He leaned against the counter, watching me with that steady gaze. "You always say that, don't you?" My breath hitched, and I didn't know why. We stood there, the house settling around us, the air thick with something I couldn't name. "Lila's been pulling away again," he said, almost to himself. "I don't know if she even notices anymore, but you do, don't you?" I nodded, my throat tight. "It's hard to miss," I murmured. I don't know, I love her, but sometimes I wonder if she loves us back." His eyes darkened, searching mine. "You deserve more than being stuck in her shadow, Ellie." The words hit me like a quiet thunderclap, stirring something deep. I wanted to brush it off, but it sank in, heavy and true. It was late when Lila finally emerged, paint-streaked and distracted, mumbling goodnight before disappearing upstairs. James stayed, helping me finish, and I excused myself to my room. But sleep didn't come. My mind replayed his look, his voice, the way he'd seen me, not as a daughter, but as me. It felt wrong, shameful, but it burned through me, keeping me awake as Lila's soft snores drifted down the hall. After that, everything changed. James was around more, fixing things around the house, asking me to help with small projects. It was innocent enough, or so I told myself, but I felt him, his presence seeping into my days like ink into water. We started talking more, late into the evenings after Lila went to bed. She'd vanish into her art, leaving us to our quiet conversations over tea or the occasional beer. He'd listen as I rambled about my job, my doubts, my half-formed dreams, his attention a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. He saw me. Ellie, not the girl he'd taken in, and it woke something in me I couldn't silence. Then came the night it broke open. The dinner had ended, Lila upstairs, and James stayed to help with the dishes. He walked me to the back porch, a habit by then, to look at the stars. His hand brushed mine, and I didn't pull away. I let it linger, let him pull me closer. "Are you okay, Ellie?" he asked, his voice a whisper, heavy with something unspoken. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart pounding. "I don't know what I'm feeling anymore." His gaze softened, his fingers tightening around mine. "Let me show you you're not alone in this." He leaned in, his lips brushing mine. Soft, hesitant, a question I answered by not pulling back. It was a kiss that shattered every boundary I'd built, igniting a fire I couldn't douse. That moment hung there, fragile and alive. He drew back, his breath uneven, his eyes wide with something like fear. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I shouldn't have—" "No," I cut in, trembling. "Don't. I wanted it. I don't understand it, but I did." He stared at me, torn, then glanced toward the house. "I should go," he said, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean for this, Ellie. I care about you. Too much to let this hurt you. You need to figure out what this is." I stood there, paralyzed, caught between the man who'd raised me and this stranger who'd awakened me. He left, the door shutting softly, and I was alone with my chaos. The days after were a tangle of avoidance and yearning. I dodged him, but he was everywhere. In the creak of the stairs, the scent of sawdust in the garage. Lila drifted on, oblivious, her distance a silent permission for my thoughts to spiral. One night, a week later, I was in the kitchen, stirring soup, lost in my head. James appeared, his face shadowed. "Thought you'd be alone," he said, a faint smile flickering. I shook my head, pulse racing. "Lila's painting. She'll be down soon." He stepped closer, his eyes intense. "You've been avoiding me." "I haven't," I lied, the words frail. "I just don't know what to say, James." He closed the distance, his voice steady. "You don't have to say anything, Ellie. But you can't keep running from this. From us. From what you're feeling." The truth stung, raw and undeniable. "I'm not asking you to destroy anything," he said softly. "I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about what you need." It hit me hard, a call to something I'd buried under duty. "I don't know if I can," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can hurt her? Or you? I don't know what this makes me." His gaze softened, aching with understanding. "I'm not asking you to hurt anyone. I'm asking you to find yourself." "I'll wait," he added gently. "But you're not alone in this." That night I lay awake, torn between the father I'd known and this man I craved. Lila's breathing beside me felt like a tether to a life I wasn't sure I fit anymore. James had stirred something wild in me, and I couldn't unfeel it. The days blurred, my routine a mask. His words haunted me, daring me to choose. Lila's indifference grew, and I wondered if she'd ever truly cared. I thought about telling James everything, my fear, my longing, but the betrayal loomed too large. I waited for clarity that never came. It was a Saturday when it unraveled. Lila came home late, paint on her hands, her eyes distant. I was reading in the living room when she paused. "You've been off, Ellie," she said, her tone flat. "Something's wrong." You don't act like my daughter anymore. I froze, dread pooling. I'm just tired, I said, the lie thin. She tilted her head, studying me. Is it James? My heart stopped. What? I've seen it, she said, calm and cold. The way you look at him. You think I don't notice? He's not your father, not really, but he's mine. I felt sick, exposed. I don't know what you mean, I stammered. She sighed, almost resigned. I've watched you drift. I know what's happening. But he'll never leave me, Ellie. You're just a phase. Before I could reply, the door opened. James stepped in, his face tight with something unspoken. He looked at Lila, then me, his voice low. We need to talk. Lila crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Go ahead, James, tell her. He flinched, caught, then turned to me, desperation in his gaze. Ellie, Get out, Lila snapped, her voice rising. Both of you, get out of my house. I stood, trembling, as James reached for me. I pulled away, running after him as he stormed out. James, wait. He stopped, his voice raw. Don't, Ellie. This isn't right, not like this. Well, I cried, breaking. Why did you let me feel this? His face crumpled. Because I couldn't stop it. But you deserve better than this mess. He walked away, leaving me in the dark. The next morning, Lila was gone. A note saying she needed time. Beside it, a photo of James, younger, with another woman, and a scrawled line. He's not who you think, Ellie. My world tilted. If you want more, comment part 2 below. I'll keep it going. Your feedback drives this. Stay tuned.